Good. Study session for the City of Wheat Ridge for the October 4th, 2021. Thank you for being here. All of our city council members are here with the exception of Zach Urban. Zach asked to be excused tonight. And with council's permission, I'd like to ask Karen to introduce what I called pre-item 1A, which is some pending legislation that is coming into the session. So Karen would like to introduce this, so
Thank you, Mayor.
Actually, before we do any business, I'd like to start with the citizens' right to speak, and any citizen who's here or with us online is happy to speak at the beginning of our study session on any item that is on the study session. And I have no one signed up to speak here on my sign-up sheet. If you're in the hall and would like to join us, or if there's anyone online, if you would please raise your hand, and we'll call on you to speak. And I'll ask our city clerk or whoever's monitoring.
Yeah, actually, we have Lauren Mikulak
Lauren, okay.
The call virtually monitoring the chat.
Okay.
So, Lauren, do you have any speakers for us?
There's nobody joining us on Zoom tonight.
Okay. So it looks like we don't have any of our public wanting to speak tonight, so we will go to our agenda item number 1A. Karen O'Donnell.
Thank you, Mayor. I'm just going to pass around copies of this letter that I'm going to be talking about, just so you have it for reference in front of you. So Kayla Betzel, our sustainability coordinator, received an email late last week, and it was too late to be included in the agenda, so I appreciate the opportunity to address it during staff reports. But essentially, we were approached by an organization called Trees for Community Recovery, and it's a broad consortium of conservation and community development organizations and municipal and county governments, which includes the Urban Drawdown Initiative, American Forests, Trust for Public Land, the Davey Tree Expert Company, and Urban Sustainability Directors Network, and they're galvanizing support for protection and expansion of urban and community forests. And essentially, they're looking for support. Thus far, their movement helped shape actual policy recommendations that include a $3 billion investment into urban and community forestry over the next 10 years. And this could be the type of transformational investment that, along with local investments and action, could both protect our existing urban forests and expand it sufficiently to protect and enliven our communities through the coming years of climate change impacts. And knowing that forestry has been an important initiative with this council, I thought that it was important to bring it to your attention as they're looking for support by Wednesday. And essentially, it's our elected officials, our mayors, county commissioners, and officials whose voices are now most actively being considered as we are in the final moments of where you determine whether this becomes a law or is cut and discarded from legislation. So we're just asking for consensus to add the City of Wheat Ridge to this letter. And I can read it if you think it's appropriate for anyone who might be online. And I can also add that this campaign has support from the mayors of Lakewood, Denver, Thornton, Lyons, Fort Collins, and many more across the country.
Thank you. Do questions or discussion? Ms.
I have a question about whether this, as a late coming thing to our meeting, can be made public, the letter made public at a later point rather than reading it out loud. Is that,
absolutely.
just so people can see the letter. My question was, when you talk about urban forests, do we qualify as, is there a definition around urban forest, or is it just the tree canopy within urban areas?
I believe it's just the tree canopy within urban areas, yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Questions, Ms. Soltine?
Thanks. I just have a request, since this wasn't in our package. Karen, your introductory comments, you actually listed several organizations that this is partnering with.
Yes.
Can you make that available both to council and the public? Because I think that's an important coalition for us to be aware of. And I'm enthusiastically in support of this, and will definitely support the consensus.
Additional questions or discussion? Ms. Hoppe?
Thanks, Mr. Mayor, and it's been asked a couple of times, but if you could just send a digital file to our deputy clerk so that we can put it in whole in the minutes, that would be great, and I also will support this.
Additional discussion or questions? Okay, I think Ms. O'Donnell was looking for consensus to move this, to approve this, to move forward, and we have consensus by the council. So thank you for bringing this forward. And so we will go to our number one item. This is staff reports, and we have a discussion on board and commission recreation benefits. And,
Thank you again, that's me. Okay, so the city council requested that the city offer the recreation benefits to our current board and commission members. So I was asked to develop a proposal and share that with all of you. And we currently have an administrative policy number 601-30 that's our citywide employee recreation benefits. And the proposal would be just to add active board and commission members to that existing policy, and the benefits received would be free drop-in use of the Wheat Ridge Recreation Center, which the amenities are listed there. The one thing I would call out is that members would be required to pay for services used. So that would be, you know, classes, babysitting, facility rentals, things that aren't included in your drop-in use. And then free drop-in use of the Wheat Ridge outdoor pool at the Anderson Park. Let's see, so commission members would have to fill out this form that you all received. It's pretty simple, and I was asked if they needed to include their birth date, if that was really important, but it is for our registration software, so just so you know, that's why it's there. And so they would just fill that simple form out, and we would just have the administrative assistant to mayor and council provide periodic member updates, maybe quarterly, so that we can just compare our list with active members, so we make sure we're maintaining that for accuracy. And so we're really just looking for consensus to move forward with this proposal.
thank you. Questions? Ms. Weaver?
Thank you for your research and everything on this. I was just curious, so boards and commissions are specific, but this would not include committee members? Or I'm just thinking of the various, where does this stop and start as far as the involvement of our, and that might be more of a question for someone else, but, you know, we have a sustainability committee, and we have some other things, so, and task forces, and I'm just kind of curious, I don't know if we gave you direction on that, or if we have other conversation on how far this goes, so I'm asking the question. Thank you.
And I think that would ultimately be up to you, but I think we could utilize like who's invited to our boards and commissions event, maybe as a starting point, and see if there's anybody that we'd want to add to that list.
It would seem it would be good to have sort of a list of what boards and commissions or task forces or committees, or what's the universe of.
I would just say that, I mean, boards and commissions is kind of the simplest approach, just, and you can go further, but just because a lot of those committees would be ad hoc committees that would be time limited, so it might become burdensome to kind of manage that list over time if people fall off, on and off those. Whereas the boards and commissions are actually in our city charter, so we really know what they are. But we can certainly do whatever you direct.
Okay, Ms. Noslerbeck and then Ms. Hulteen.
I would like us to explore if we can do this for committees and task force and the broader scope, if it's going to just check and see how burdensome it might be or what kind of impact it would have to cost, because whether you're on a committee or a task force, you're still volunteering quite a bit of time. And I would say equal to, sometimes more, than some of the commissions that we've put forward. So I just asked that.
And I believe all of our committees and task forces have a staff liaison. Do they? I would assume so. So I think it would be easy enough to check in.
Ms. Hulteen?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I agree with Ms. Nosler-Beck that we should be inclusive of anyone who is giving regular service to the city, and especially if Parks and Rec is going to be doing some sort of quarterly or periodic check against that. You know, as she said, the task force is doing a lot more work right now than our housing authority. So I think, you know, the idea behind this is that we want to provide some tangible benefits to them that are, you know, representative of our city pride. So I definitely, any committee or task force that has been impaneled by council, the mayor, or, you know, is done through application and is doing official duties for the city, I think should be included in that.
Ms. Hoppy?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Yeah, I kind of feel like the intent in the first place was to also include task force and committees along with boards and commissions. And you know, even if they're on a task force, they typically have an expiration date. And so even when we're doing applications for boards and commissions, we also are doing applications for task force. So I think finding that information through the city clerk's office would be very easy to do. But I'm just going to ask if we want to have a consensus to move forward and also include our task forces and our committees.
Okay, looks like we have consensus to move that forward.
Actually, I had an additional question, Mayor,
Oh,
if I could ask
Ms.
that.
Hulteen? Sure.
Yeah. So I just wanted to clarify, it's my understanding that with this benefit, you do have to pay the tax on the benefit, is that correct?
We do as employees, I do not, the volunteers would not. The city
They
would
would
have to
not,
pay
okay.
for it, but we would not
Okay.
charge the volunteers.
Okay, I just wanted to make sure if they were being taxed
Yep.
on that, that was clearly communicated, but that, it's good to hear they won't be, so thank you.
Okay. Ms. Hutchinson?
Thank you, Mayor. I think, do I understand this correctly, that this came about because we have a difficult time getting people on boards and commissions, okay? So I would be interested to find out how well this program is working. You know, are people taking advantage of it or not? Does it help people to want to be on these things? I don't know, I volunteered for a long time and I never got things for volunteering, but I think it would be interesting to find out if, you know, people want to participate more because of this, you know? And if it doesn't make a difference, then we have another issue. Thank you.
And it looked like you were going to be able to provide some feedback on usage and
Absolutely, we can run
yeah,
reports to determine
okay.
if people are signing up, utilizing the services. We can provide that information.
Ms.
to you
Weaver?
once implemented.
But not on council members, right?
Yeah. Ms. Nosler-Beck?
I think that Councilmember Hutchinson brought up a great point, though. This is one of those things that we are trying to do in order to improve participation from the community, and I'd like to see if it's possible, whether it's through Parks and Rec or through our city, you know, PIO, how we're going to, I'd like to market this, if there's a way to let folks know that this is something that you get when you're a part of boards and commissions.
Yeah, it would seem to me that we may want to put some, you know, duties and benefits of being on a board and commission member. You know, these are the standard duties that you need to do, and, you know, show up at the meetings and be prepped, and this is one of the benefits. Ms. Hoppy?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. And when applications come open in March, it's definitely a piece that can be included in that. So, you know, when we are on the dais and talking about like,
Mhm.
hey, you know, we have positions available on these different, you know, boards and commissions and committees and task force, and, you know, please apply, and we have this new package, so we can also apply.
Yeah, if this is something that we can offer as a city to our citizens, and they can enjoy that, and they can also participate in their government, so much the better, so we can advertise for sure. Okay, thank you for bringing that forward. Any other discussion?
And if I could just add one thing,
You
Mayor.
may.
We, the graphic that you'll see on there too, our graphic designer just created that to be able to send out in an email to people that are current board and commission members and committee and task force members, of course. But we can also utilize that or tweak it a little bit for social media as we're recruiting as well.
Thank you. All right, we'll go to item number 2 on our agenda. This is a discussion on land acknowledgement. This was brought to council by council members Hoppy and Nosler Beck, and I will ask you to introduce this item.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Through several discussions.
Can you put your mic a little closer?
Yes, sorry, I have so
Okay.
much business in front of me. Is this better?
That's good.
Okay. Through several discussions that I had with citizens in District 1, and then continuing those discussions with Councilwoman Nosler-Beck and Director O'Donnell, we came to kind of a thought process and a plan where we felt that not only is land acknowledgement important in several communities, but also should be important in our community, and that a really good starting place to do that would be able to do that through Parks and Rec. So we created the Race and Task Force, which was the Race and Equity Task Force, which was a really great step towards moving our community towards a more inclusive community. And the community asked for that, and we responded pretty quickly. And then I started looking for different opportunities for us to move our community more towards an inclusive community. One of those kind of stood out to me when we were looking at the 2021 resident survey and looking at the data. We added a new question in the survey about inclusivity and equity in Wheat Ridge. And looking at the data from the answers, the scientific citizen survey that was sent out, 60% of the respondents felt like we were doing fair to poor at attracting people from diverse backgrounds in our community. And 53% of them felt like we were doing fair to poor and valuing residents from different diverse backgrounds. And 40% said we were doing fair to poor and respecting individual cultural beliefs and values. So to me, this seemed like a really logical next step. Another thing I just wanted to bring up too is that also in the question of, opportunities to attend cultural activities, we only scored a 26% in the good to excellent. So this gives us opportunities to be able to address some of those concerns from our citizens. And this is the small amount of work that we've done on this very large job to date. And I'll give Councilwoman Nosler-Beck an opportunity to also speak now.
Thanks, Councilwoman Hoppy. I think that you address a lot of this in what you were saying, but just to expand a little bit more into the opportunity that I think is here, working with Parks and Rec, with all of the upcoming plans we have in both parks and open space and what we're doing in the city, we can both going forward incorporate land acknowledgement, and then also as we are fixing up some of our already current parks, we can go back and go and do land acknowledgements in that space as well. I think there is also an opportunity for incorporating like native plantings from the area. And I'm really looking forward to using a lot of the current infrastructure that we have, like the Historical Society, seeing how we can make sure that they're included in this process, how residents who have been here for a long time and new residents who are coming to the city can be a part of this process as well.
Yeah, and I guess I would also say that this is an opportunity where we can walk and chew gum at the same time. Kind of what we're asking for council to consider tonight is really just a tip of what we can do in the future. And we also have some really great resources in our community through the Race and Equity Task Force, through Wheat Ridge for Equity, through the Cultural Commission, through the Historical Society, the Wheat Ridge Historical Society. So, there's opportunities to be able to bring everybody in. There's enough room at the table for everybody to have a seat. And so, what Ms. O'Donnell has put in, the memo about like just some of the first steps we can do and some of the very first pieces that we can do through the Parks and Rec Department. And I very much appreciate Director O'Donnell's support on this. And I will give it over to Karen for anything she'd like to add.
Thank you, Mayor Pro Tem Hoppy and Councilwoman Nosler-Beck. I appreciate the support as we've met to discuss this topic multiple times to get to where we are. Just to give you a little bit of background too, this first came to my attention during last year's Wheat Ridge 101 class, and one of the community members brought it up, and I said, wow, that's really interesting, tell me more. So that's kind of how I got engaged in this, and I'm definitely not an expert in land acknowledgement. There's a big learning curve here. I did have the opportunity to meet with somebody from History Colorado and learned a lot about the history of Indigenous people in this area. I learned a lot about the process and how we would move forward with communicating with various tribes. So definitely a good resource there. And we have some passionate community members. And so you can see here in the memo what land acknowledgement is, but I'll just read that component. Indigenous land acknowledgement is an effort to recognize the Indigenous past, present, and future of a particular location and to understand our own place within that relationship. Usually land acknowledgements take the form of written and or verbal statements. It's becoming more and more common to see land acknowledgements delivered at conferences, community gatherings, places of worship, concerts, and festivals. So I provided just an example from Denver City Council, just because I thought it was relevant to a city council, but you can go online and find a lot of colleges and universities, nonprofits, a lot of other communities across the country have land acknowledgement statements. So there's many, many, many examples out there. You can even just Google land acknowledgement and just get just so many different ideas. And so the initial proposal would be to develop a land acknowledgement statement for the city of Wheat Ridge, because I think that's the important first step to really do anything else. And the idea would be to incorporate the community in that process. So when you look at the letter that is attached, you'll see that there's a land acknowledgement statement there. That's really just a starting point. That was just a sample to show you what a letter of this nature might look like. But again, we'd want to include anybody from the community that's interested, but especially the Race and Equity Task Force, the Wheat Ridge Historical Society, and others, and incorporating the feedback from the various tribes, which is why this letter is really important in getting their feedback and just expressing that we're really interested in developing a connection and determining what that would look like to them, to the various tribes, and how we can support them and have this mutually beneficial relationship moving forward. And what I learned from the contact at History Colorado is that really needs to come from you all, that it's our government working with their government, and it's just out of respect. This level of the organization is who needs to be making that communication. So I have found all the different contact information for all of the tribes in this area and can certainly provide that and can adapt letters and things like that, but it really will need to come from council. But then once the land acknowledgement statement is developed, really, as mentioned, we can start in Parks and Recreation. It's very easy to incorporate in events and in groundbreakings or in like the grand reopening of Prospect Park Phase 2, for example, would be a perfect opportunity to incorporate a land acknowledgement. And we can also incorporate it in signage, in parks, educational programs, and native plantings, as mentioned. So the request is for consensus to provide direction to the Parks and Recreation Department to move forward with developing a land acknowledgement statement and incorporating it into department programs and practices.
Okay, thank you. Open for questions, comments, Ms. Hutchinson.
Thank you, Mayor. I think it would be interesting to know the period of time when the tribes were here, different tribes that should be available. And also on the letter that was sent, if you could explain, what are fundraisers for land tax movement? It's on the back page. I don't know what that means.
So I found a ton of information online, and these are just kind of bullet points. They do, there's land tax movements for different tribes, so it would just be us assisting with a fundraiser for their tribes. And it, again, it's just an example if they needed help with something of that nature.
It would also be something where we can utilize our online space to give them another opportunity to reach people that would donate. So it wouldn't be taking money into Wheat Ridge and then donating that, out to the different tribes. It would be, there is already a nonprofit, and it would be a link to that nonprofit. So it's really utilizing our reach that our website has to help them with some fundraising.
So this would be like fundraising for certain things like healthcare for them, or I don't know what
It could-
nonprofits they would.
Theoretically be anything, and I think this is just an idea of, and I also want to clarify, because I didn't mention it, and it's not clear because this letter has a date on it. This letter was not sent. This is just an example, and that's when I drafted it. So, but I think it's just providing ideas so that hopefully they would come back to us and let us know what they could utilize our help with, and then we can kind of determine if we have the capacity to do that.
Okay, that makes sense. Thank you.
Okay. Additional questions? Ms. Nosler-Beck, and then Ms. Hulteen?
This isn't a question, this is a comment. I think it's important to keep in mind that this is what we're suggesting the city does for land acknowledgement, but by no means is this the only thing that the community can do in land acknowledgement or recognition of what happened before what we see as Wheat Ridge today was. I'm a part of one of the families that settled here in the 1880s. Our photos out in the city hall of us standing at 45th and Wadsworth in 1890. This has been a process that is very personal. We keep talking about land acknowledgement, but I really ask the community to join us in also the acknowledgement of the humans and the people who were here prior to how we see our city as being settled and on this land. So I just wanted to make it clear that this is what we are doing as a formal process, but there's still so much more out there with some of these other organizations that we were talking about to add that other texture. But this is this work they asked for the city.
Thank you. Ms. Hulteen, and then Ms. Hoppy.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I'm glad that this is in front of us and that we're hopefully moving forward with this. I have one question and then one suggestion. First of all, it's really helpful in this to see these examples so that we can kind of tangibly see what exactly it is that we're talking about and get ideas on different verbiage. When the letters ultimately go out to the tribes that you're making contact with, is it appropriate for other council members to sign onto that too? Is there some reason why we could or could not? Because I think to receive the letter and to have, as many signatories, elected officials signing on as possible would be, I think, is a statement about our support. So I would definitely support that if that's an option.
Yeah, I think that would be fine.
Okay, awesome. And then my suggestion is, in reading the letter, and I realize that this is just a draft that we're working with here. I would love to see us really open more strongly with not like, here's what we're doing, we believe we're doing this, but rather being much more receptive to say, we're starting this process and to really open with, in your experience, what do we need to know? What do we need to learn? What are things we need to be thinking about? And to really open more strongly with an invitation for them to share their cultural preferences and best practices. I feel like it's a really strong, like, leading with us letter, and the intent of this is for us to be learning from them. And there's several, I got excited when I read this, and to Ms. Nosler-Beck's point, that there's a lot of different programmatic ways that we can be addressing this issue beyond just our Parks and Rec. And I think, there's a couple things in here, like, it's our hope to develop and foster a lasting relationship with Northern Cheyenne Tribe. And I think that it's a beautiful expression. And I think if we're going to say that, I think we should have some sense of what that actually looks like. What does that fostering a relationship look like, so that we're not just saying it, but actually, looking for how do we sustain that dialogue, and, what does that partnership look like? And Miss, did you suggest the native plantings? Somebody dropped native plantings. All right. I think anyone at this table would drop native plantings. I'm going to give you all credit, but I think things like that are great suggestions. Like, these are things that in our community would make sense. Like, give them like tangible things. Like, we'd be looking for, do you have any recommendation on like native plantings that would be, appropriate for our community to consider through other things? So if you have specific programmatic ideas or suggestions, I'm really looking forward to hearing the responses to these letters, and so I'd like to make it as inviting as possible for them to be more forward sharing, that we can then incorporate that in. Thank you.
Ms. Hoppy?
Thanks, Mr. Mayor. Yeah, Councilwoman Nosler-Beck and I and Director O'Donnell, we're hoping for a consensus to move forward tonight. If that happens, then as counselors, we'll continue to do the work that we've been doing with Director O'Donnell, and if there's anyone else who wants to be a part of that work, you're welcome to join that table. I call it tennis ball. You're welcome to pick up that tennis ball and run with it. So, but we really just wanted to have the initial conversation, and then just make sure that we have some consensus to move forward from council before we ended up getting hip deep. So.
Ms. Weaver?
I agree with everything that has been commented on, and I'm really supportive of this. To Councilor Hulteen's point of just being, of extending that questioning of what is most helpful for tribes, and sort of what, just so we're very careful not to appropriate certain things without cultural sensitivity, and that tribes should drive what the acknowledgement looks like, not necessarily us, if that makes sense. Thanks, and I will be supporting this.
Okay, additional discussion? All right, we're looking for a consensus to move forward with this. Ms. O'Donnell read that. Do we have consensus? We do. Ms. O'Donnell? Thank you, Ms. Hoppy and Ms. Nosler-Beck, for bringing this forward, and keep working on it. Thank you. Okay, we'll move to the third item on our agenda, and this is a discussion about Let's Talk, a resident engagement program update. And Ken?
Yeah, I'll be brief, but we're definitely excited to be in front of you for one of our periodic updates. Thanks, Karen. On the Let's Talk resident engagement program. We recently have wrapped up our second round of 2 neighborhoods, so we've made it through 4 of the 10 neighborhoods identified in the NRS, and we're marching forward with our next 2 have started as well, and we'll talk a little bit about that tonight as well. So we have our fearless team of 2, Jeff Hurd and Ashley Holland, here to give you an update. And based on the 417 pages in your packet, it's clear that they've been doing a lot of work. So I'll turn it over to Jeff to kick us off.
Thanks, Ken, and yeah, sorry for the volume, but we try to make it user-friendly so you can go to just a couple pages if you don't want to read through all that stuff. But So our purpose tonight is, like Ken said, to update you on kind of what the latest 2 neighborhoods told us from the latest engagement blitz we had, those being Applewood and Leftland Manor. And then an overall program update and program work plan update. And look forward to your comments and discussion on this. And so as a reminder, so this program breaks the city down into 10 neighborhoods for really focused neighborhood-specific resident engagement. And so we may have shared this little flow chart with you before, but this is essentially kind of the anatomy of one of our engagement blitzes. Usually around 5 months, we do 2 neighborhoods at a time. And so we very deliberately keep it kind of simple and do just a couple rounds of engagement and keep it very open-ended. So round 1 will ask a very open-ended questions. What do you love? What do you need? Kind of level questions. And don't try to steer the conversation toward any particular topic. Let residents tell us what's important to them. And then round 2 is about sort of curating an action item list that we think is both within the city's wheelhouse and realistic things for us to explore and to have folks kind of rank and prioritize those and to get to something fairly actionable in our work plan that we'll share a little bit with you tonight and certainly in your packet. And so looking at the 10 neighborhoods, and I'll circle back to the next 2 neighborhoods, but just to clarify, we've covered 4 of 10 neighborhoods, so East Meat Ridge and Bel Air were first. We just completed Applewood and Leftland Manor. Fruitdale and Anderson Park will be next, and I'll circle back to that, like I said, for why we went that direction. I won't go into the detail on how we reach people. There's an appendix as part of your 400-page packet that breaks down all the ways we reach people, but we do 4 mailers, so 2 per round, basically being like, hey, did you hear about the survey? Hey, did you hear about the survey in these events? Just to give people as many opportunities as possible to engage. Lots of social media stuff. And then we've got a really robust list on What's Up Wheat Ridge. We've got well over 1,000 people registered through this program there, so we've got a great communication channel directly to people. So we truly do blitz these neighborhoods. And so this is a look at, to date, how many individuals in these neighborhoods have engaged with us. And so in total, I think we're approaching 1,000. And so these are individuals, not number of times they've taken a survey or whatever. And I think proportionately, the numbers look different. Proportionally, they're actually really similar, like population-wise in each of these neighborhoods. In and around 5% of the population has engaged. I think Bel Air had the highest proportion of people that engaged. It was like 8% or something. And so just to call your attention to in your packet, and I know they're huge reports, but we do try to make them user-friendly and kind of visual and graphics-rich. And each neighborhood gets its own blitz report. And so definitely encourage you to take a look at those. We do try to keep it kind of simple to the extent possible. So as folks comment in these open-ended forums, we tag how many times a certain thing was said and do like sub-tags. So it's very quantified in terms of what people told us in these open-ended questions. But if you wanted to get to like the snapshot, there's a table in each report that breaks down the top 10, which is, I think you can see that. But sort of the top 10 in each neighborhood or top 8 or 9 things that are most important to people and how they ranked. It's like your sort of, I think your go-to, like what's most important. That's when this, in the city's wheelhouse, at least in each of these neighborhoods. And so I'm going to highlight kind of the top things that we heard from each of the last 2 neighborhoods, and then just talk a little bit about our ongoing work plan, and then open it up for discussion here. So as far as what Applewood told us, so of the, I think, 9 things they weighed in on, 38th Avenue West was number 1 in terms of improvements for walking and biking. And then number 2 was to improve the Youngfield corridor. And again, these weren't solicited opinions. These were kind of like, what do you need? What do you love? What's important to you? And this came kind of grassroots from that. So I'll highlight these 2 things real quick in terms of what's going on and what people said. And I know this is a busy slide, but just giving you kind of the how that framework and that sort of 2-round approach gets us to an action item or what residents think about these things. So, for example, on 38th Avenue, we asked during round 1, what do you love, what do you need? And we tagged, I think number 1 of all the things tagged was people said bike ped stuff, bike ped access, bike ped safety. And then you sort of do like sub-tags, and then within that, people said 38th Avenue the most. And so then round 2 was like, well, okay, well, so let's put that on the table. Is improving 38th Avenue, how important is that to you as an action item to rank? And it was number 1, I think, by far, actually. And so then we roll that into the program work plan, recognizing this isn't originating out of this plan. We know this has been going on for years, this corridor, but just the current kind of neighborhood sentiment on this particular corridor. So it was number one. Of the people that weighed in, 80% supported it during these improvements. It wasn't just biking and walking. It was aesthetics too, in particular in Applewood. The importance of kind of the Applewood aesthetic, which is articulated in a lot of the comments, traffic flow, things like that. Certainly recognizing the integration of the 38th Avenue East. And so the next one was Youngfield Corridor. So this emerged similarly out of this flow of periods of comment where folks said, actually in this case, the general broad comment was our commercial corridors need work generally. And then we sort of like the sub-bullet is Youngfield was mentioned within that a lot. So then we asked, what do you think about improving the Youngfield corridor? And it was number 3 on their list. Also 81% supported that, sorry, number 2. Yeah, number 2. Same type of issues from folks as 38th Avenue in a lot of ways, but different sort of aesthetic and things like noise and pollution and ice and things like that. Not surprising. So exciting thing about this particular one, I think both 38th and Youngfield both have momentum and council's taking these topics up soon, but we had already kind of been developing concepts for improving this corridor, working with a consultant leading to the Urban Renewal Authority, planning to issue bonds in about a month for these improvements. So it's the type of thing that's good to report back to residents that your feedback is aligning well with what we've already been doing. And for that feedback to inform these efforts in terms of what their preferences and what's important to them. Okay, so that's Applewood, Lapland Manor, highlighting a couple top things. So the top 3 in this case, because they kind of separated from the pack, that's just the top 2 in Applewood. Number 1 was 44th Avenue and targeted improvements, and I'll talk about what that means or how that was framed to folks. Number 2 was more resources for the neighborhood traffic management program, which is essentially in response to speeding concerns and safety concerns in the neighborhood, in the residential streets. And then 3rd was to improve the Clear Creek access point on Oda Street. And so again, same flow here, 44th Avenue and commercial corridors came up, I think the most, or in the top 3 during that open-ended comment period. So that we owned it on 44, put together an action item that we thought was something realistic in terms of looking at 44th Avenue and the potential for that, so that lands in the work program. And so also 81% supported this one, which is weird how specific that number is, but it was number 1. And so this is an example of an image that was put in that action item, just to get an idea of like what we might have in mind or some options. So it was framed as very targeted in the sense of like it's probably not feasible to look at reconstruction of that road now, to change the number of lanes or the traffic flow. So these would need to be really strategic, targeted things like planter boxes and beautification things kind of within the existing right of way. And people were very fond of this idea, even as being framed as kind of a lower cost option, frankly. But their particular kind of angle on this was obviously walking and biking aesthetics, but in particular, just spiffing it up to encourage more businesses and support existing businesses. And so for this one, in terms of us kind of deliberating as staff, we do think this has some potential to explore in 2022 in terms of looking at some of these concepts and putting together some ideas for budget and things like that to bring back to council. Tactical urbanism is a term you may have heard. It's like a city planning jargon nerdy thing, but sort of the temporary things that are movable and you can kind of play with a bit to figure out the long-term vision of the street. I think the last one I'll highlight is the Oda Street Trailhead. So folks definitely told us bike ped is a big issue in the neighborhood, and they kind of honed in on this particular trailhead. And we put the option out there for folks. They ranked it number 3 on their action item list. 75% of folks supported it. And there were a lot of comments on this one in terms of access, safety, signage, drainage, lighting. And if you go down there, there are certainly a lot of issues down there. This one we can also report, and I think an example of how this program has really helped a lot of these items. So this had been on the city's radar screen. Parks folks and some of the engineers had been aware of this being just sort of a problematic trailhead And so it's funky because like to get to it, you actually have to go through the city of Arvada for a little stretch, and it's right up against I-70, so it's got these complexities. The transportation folks and the parks folks had already kind of been talking and initiated conversations with Arvada and CDOT. And so this feedback, I think, is catalyzing that and bolstering it and speeding it along as a somewhat of a priority. And it really helps. One thing I've definitely learned is as parks goes for funding and grant applications, having this resident feedback to put into that package is really helpful to kind of bolster and show that the residents support this. So those are kind of the highlights from the specific things. I'll call your attention in your packet to the broader program work plan. So this is just across all neighborhoods as we learn about these things and figure out what's important to people. This doesn't go through and say, these are all the things that we're doing, and necessarily it's just kind of a status of all these things that may have come from other portals and are supported by this program or may have come out of this program. And it shows how each neighborhood sort of ranked them and supports them. So lots of details in there. I encourage you to look at that. There are a couple things I did want to highlight, program related, that we have done since we last talked to you in April on this program. So one related to communications on development proposals, as we're calling it. So one thing we definitely heard, and not surprising to anyone in the room probably, is that people just want more and better opportunities to just know what's going on, right? Development, infrastructure, physical changes in their neighborhood. We haven't done a great job as a city of giving somebody a user-friendly portal to go and navigate our website, for example. So a couple things we've done on this front. One, we have advanced our development mapping interface, which will be publicly available. And that is slated to be hopefully rolled out next year, middle part of next year, I think is the goal. And part of that kind of package is hiring a new GIS technician, so Geographic Information System person. One of their roles would be to kind of manage this portal, which is important to make sure it gets updated and is a valuable resource sort of in perpetuity. And another thing on this front, we are in before council soon actually is a zoning code amendment to enhance the notice that we do for land use applications to include property owners and occupants or renters, which is not something that folks know. So that came out of this program explicitly. Other things that I won't go through, these are all things going on through different channels that kind of supported or bolstered through this program. But we did request more funding for the neighborhood traffic management program and the dumpster days. The dumpster days are super popular, and residents in this program are telling us, like, yes, please more of that for a variety of reasons. Also, putting 35th Avenue and East Sweet Ridge into the 5-year CIP is supported by this program in terms of the area from roughly Teller to Sheridan and bike-head improvements there mostly. Obviously, the green on 38th is advancing. That relates to just the general 38th Avenue East priority for folks citywide, but in Sweet Ridge. And then you on from there with what's happening in AVs and Bold Plain. Those are also things that didn't necessarily come out of this program, but we've heard a lot about through this program, and people are supportive of doing something about those things. Next steps, and there's slides here, and I'll stop talking. So, like I said, we are going to Anderson Park and Fruitdale next, and so that blitz will run from now until about March of next year. So those web pages are live now, and the round one time to pump surveys are live. So we'll start pushing those out. I'll certainly encourage you all to spread the word about that. And in particular, Councilwoman Dozeman and Councilor being in your districts. We're planning to reach out to you kind of separately and directly to see how you might want to get involved, give you some options. We've got a bit of a template for that to the extent you're available and interested. And so we chose these neighborhoods because of the first neighborhood is actually north of Clear Creek, so there's a huge geography of the city we haven't covered yet. We also think it'll tie well into the 44th Avenue corridor plan, which is slated to kick off early part of next year. We think it'll tee that up nicely and tie in. Overall goal to cover the city now by about early to mid 2023 for all 10 neighborhoods. And that concludes the program update, at least. I know it's a lot in your packet, but happy to answer questions or entertain any comments.
Okay, thank you very much. Mr. Stites?
Excuse me, thank you, Jeff and Ashley, for all the hard work you guys have done on this. I got a chance to sit in on a couple of the virtual meetings, and I thought they were pretty valuable, and I like the way that you guys pulled a lot of really good information out of the residents that were there. I had a question about the rezoning of 38th and Miller. Can you tell me a little bit more about that? Sorry, that's not something I've heard a lot of walking the district, and so, or maybe I have, I just maybe put a different way. Can you guys kind of explain that a little bit?
So the origins of that one were, we heard a lot from folks, they want more neighborhood scale, neighborhood serving retail, right? The big box stuff is great at Applewood and all that, but we want, our neighborhood spot. So we were kind of putting our heads together and figuring out what kind of action item would address that is. It was kind of a challenge, but then we looked at this area of Applewood, West 38th Avenue, that has some of those elements, right? It's got some historic character to it, buildings pushed to the street. And then we had learned that property owners in the past had approached us looking at our rezoning. So there was interest from those folks generally. And so, and then we looked at the current zoning, which is more conducive to kind of that big box, big parking lot kind of setup that, with one of our mixed-use zone districts, they're much more calibrated to support kind of a local neighborhood commercial area. So anyway, long story short, that was kind of the origin of that, and we were careful with the wording, but put it out there, and I think, it was ranked third of, which was a bit of a surprise, but had more support than we thought, yeah.
Well, I know 38th and Miller tends to be a sore subject just in history because it's been slated to be a lot of things and isn't anything. So I could see why that can be a frustration for the neighbors. So again, thank you for all your hard work.
Ms. Hoppe?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, and thanks, Jeff and Ashley, for this. What I really love about these, and so, I had East Wheat Ridge, we've got Southeast Wheat Ridge coming up at some point, and then some of Lepa Manor is kind of in my area. So what I really love about this is that when we're engaging the community and we're hearing kind of what's important to them, it's oftentimes being also echoed and reflected into other things. So as I was looking through the citizen survey today, and I was also looking through the East Wheat Ridge again for the 10th time, there's a lot of stuff that is really echoed between the two. And I know that one of the big concerns when we first did the NRS update was that, well, it's a listening tour and we're just going to be hanging out being passive for this many years. And I'll use this for the second time tonight. We are again walking and chewing gum at the same time. And so when you pull out these priorities and it's this is what we're already, this is what we're hearing from the people, and then we're able to tell them, and we're working on that piece. And so I appreciate that, and I appreciate all the hard work. And so thank you very much for that. And thank you to the citizens who participated, because without your voice, we would be walking blind here. So thank you.
Ms. Soltine?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, and I too want to thank the citizens. Having participated when I was doing in my neighborhood and sitting in on other ones for other neighborhoods. District 2 is totally covered now. Thank you for getting my district done. But really, it is the citizens who are showing up, and they're showing up because you guys are reaching them and listening. And I know it's gaining momentum. I'm hearing that people are feeling heard. And that makes the intent of this was for people to be able to engage with the city in a direct way. And I think it was exciting when we did the budget a couple weeks ago to see how many things that are being said and being heard are turning into action items that are being funded. Because we all know if they don't get funded, they don't happen. So it's a great collaborative process, and it's exciting to see it moving forward. So I do have a few questions. First of all, I'm just sort of curious, having been involved in the first 2 neighborhoods, and you now are getting ready to do your third round of two neighborhoods. Can you talk a little bit about how the prioritization process has evolved a little bit from the first round? I know you've done the open-ended, kind of high level, like a little more granular, and then prioritization. But I'm just curious, like, what are you learning from round to round in terms of like how to best approach that so that you're able to get the data and reflect it back to them?
So let me understand, that's a great question, I want to make sure I understand it. So what are we learning, what are we learning about the priorities of the residents across the neighborhoods, or what are we learning about our process to develop the priorities to put forward to residents, if that makes sense?
That
Am I
too is
further
a,
confusing the
yeah,
question?
yeah, no, that's actually the perfect clarifying. I meant your process, like, what did you learn from the first round that maybe you adjusted a little bit the second time in how you're engaging with people? And then I do have a second question.
Yeah. So in terms of our internal process to come up with these lists of action items, I think what we learned is maybe not the right word, there's a sweet spot when you're looking at each of these items. So it's fun to kind of like brainstorm and be like, thematically, these are the things important to people. What in that is actionable, that's realistic. So that's one always kind of an interesting exercise. But what we found kind of the sweet spot is that if you look at each of these, there's an alignment of looking at council strategic priorities, right? Things that you all are hearing. So if it's echoed across those channels, and then also like adopted policies that we have on the books, for example, that already call to do something like that. So, if that exists, those two things are great. And then if there's a third leg of that, which is that the staff and whoever's wheelhouse the topic is in, if it's parks, if it's transportation, if they look at that as we kind of vet these things internally and they say, oh yeah, that's been on our radar a while and we think that's a good idea kind of thing. So if you have these things align, it's kind of like that helps us to sort of crystallize, yeah, we should put that out there for people to weigh in. And I think that's been a learning process. I don't know about you, Ashley, anything else to add to that?
No, I think that's a great way to kind of sum it up, that just, excuse me, looking for that alignment across all kinds of different subjects.
Great, thank you for that. And then my second question, having taken the survey in my neighborhood and participated all the way through my neighborhood's process, you guys are actually like not just listening, but you are providing incredibly valuable information on complex topics that we always, as the city, it's a struggle to help explain bulk planes and ADUs and things like that. And I'm wondering if you guys have, this is kind of a vague question, so I acknowledge that before I ask it, but are you guys doing any type of feedback or observation about the learning curve of the citizens that you're engaging with? Because that's one of the things when I saw those numbers and I'm like, oh, that's 1,000 people who know a lot more about bulk plane and ADUs and some of the issues that we're trying to make sure our citizens are informed about. So I'm just sort of curious, like, are you guys, like, what's the sort of dynamic learning process on communicating these very complex issues in our city?
Well, we definitely try to work hard to make them as simple as possible. So if they can be visual, make them visual, and use fewer words kind of thing. And I think that has helped. We have had people comment like, "Oh, I get it now." Like bulk plane can be articulated in a very simple graphic, actually, but when you put it into words, it has to be this long, legalese type thing. So that's one example. ADUs is the same thing. Frankly, you can show different scenarios of ADUs in a picture. Like, oh, it's one of those. Not that gets people on like addressing traffic and parking and all that stuff, but they can at least understand what it is. But I mean, I've personally found that people are pretty well versed in these things. Once they get it, they're like, oh yeah, I understand the whole sort of neighborhood character thing and all these different impacts. I don't know. I've personally been really pleasantly surprised at the level of dialogue that we've been able to have with residents, because you never know when you start talking to somebody where they're at on the issue. Like if you need to explain what it is, and they're like, oh yeah, I get that. Or if they already know and they're like, they have like a planning degree and they're ready to dive into like the landscaping of the thing, so it's been, I'm pleasantly surprised at those issues. And if you have anything else to.
Yeah, one of the great tools that we've been using is What's Up Wheat Ridge, which allows us, every once in a while we find something where someone does have a question and some language might be confusing, and we're able to, in real time go in and say, okay, wait, how do I break this down even further? So it's as simple and as clear as possible. And so we can make some of those changes on the fly when we need to, and then of course in public meetings, we're able to fully explain things and answer questions, live. So that's always really helpful. But we've, in general, seen this program not only as a great way to get feedback, but as a wonderful education tool. And in some, not only do we have these questions about maybe new topics or topics that we need some resident feedback, but there are some things that are happening that just aren't quite well known yet. And so above and beyond, the nitty gritty of what is bulk plan and, what does an ADU mean, we're able to help educate residents about things that the city's already doing that they just might not know already exist. And so we're doing that a lot in our public meetings, and we also create a resource guide for each neighborhood. So after the first round of engagement, we hear about a bunch of topics, and we realize, there are some people who need more information about Wadsworth, and they don't know that there's going to be a trail down to Clear Creek down that section. And so even just some of those educational pieces above and beyond some more complex topics about just what's happening in the city.
Awesome, thank you so much. That's just all really exciting. We're reaching people, they're being heard, we're taking action, and we're a more informed city for it. So just think by 2023, our whole city will just be super well informed and feel heard, and everyone will be really happy. Yeah, thank
Ms.
you.
Saltine, I might add just very briefly to that response, which is these guys are doing amazing work, and I can't commend them enough, but we have kind of a shadow team behind them as well that's all across the departments. And so when we get, kind of technical issues come up, we can be pretty strategic, particularly in that round 2 blitz when we heard, well, people want to talk to NTMP. Well, we'll bring someone from that program to our second round of outreach. So we can be pretty strategic and not make it be a burden on these other people. I mean, we hired these folks to do this, but the other departments, we don't want to burden them, but we want them engaged. So that feedback loop is really important.
Great, thank you. Mr. Stites.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. One more question, sorry. I know we've talked about along the way building like champions and block captains. How's that going with this process?
Yeah, we've got a whole rigmarole to give people with handouts and guidance and here's what you can do and all these things. We've struggled to get a neighborhood champion. So honestly, if I had to ask, a tangible question of council and others, that's one thing we could really use help with is obviously getting the word out about the program, but being like, hey, because we can forward you, got a nice little one-pager that's like, hey, do you want to get involved? Here's what you can do, kind of thing. So we could forward that to you, and then if you do have folks that are interested, we would love to utilize that resource because they'll listen to you more than us. So, yeah.
And I do want to mention too, while we haven't had anyone who wants to yet call themselves a neighborhood champion, which we're hoping to have in this next blitz, we do have many individuals who have essentially been acting in that by putting out yard signs, taking postcards home from events and handing them to their neighbors, forwarding their neighbors the emails. And so while we don't have one in name yet, we're still working on it, and we still have a lot of people who are very excited and participating and sharing it with others.
Most people need that greatness thrust upon them. Yeah.
Maybe we need a double elimination tournament. Okay, additional questions, comments, discussion on this item? Ms. Nosler-Beck.
Ken kind of took my question, but I just wanted to say I'm glad that connection's being made, just because I was going through and reading a lot of the comments, and it's good to know that some of the issues, a lot of people are posting like issues that we can probably help with right away. This is another opportunity for that connection to be made. And it's great that our community has multiple ways to get access to what they need. So thanks.
Ms. Dozman.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I just wanted to echo the thanks for all of your hard work, and it was a large packet. However, I feel like it was very valuable information. I enjoyed reading what the residents had to say. And I think you're doing great work, and I'm glad that you're coming to District 4 next.
Thank you. Let me ask, after, sort of when you've gone through through all of the neighborhoods, and now we're going to be, I assume, to phase 2 or to the next, whatever the next action is, and I guess maybe I have a couple of questions. Number one is there's been, I guess through the process, neighborhoods and the staff have identified certain things that maybe should happen, or, you know, tangible things happening in the neighborhood. Does the next round to address these sort of happen in context with the neighborhood program, or more particular to those types of items sort of taking on a life of their own, or a combination of the two?
So we've been thinking about that, obviously. Once we go through the 10 neighborhoods, we don't necessarily just want to say, okay, well then, we're starting
done.
over, right?
Yeah.
I think we'll need to be thoughtful about, what neighborhoods might need more attention because developments happened or things have changed or there's an issue sensitive that it's the right time to reach out again. The other thing that we're trying to do for a couple of reasons is to use this team to assist in some of the implementation, both to kind of take the burden off of some other departments. So whether it be, being the, part of the face of the NTMP program, just examples like that, or when we do that 38th Avenue bike ped design process, that these folks might have a face in that, and we don't want to make them do everything, right? We're very sensitive to that, but I think there might be kind of offshoot projects. Mr. Hurt has a great deal of experience in code writing, right? So as things like ADUs emerge or other code amendments, we can utilize their resources in that kind of an implementation focus as well. So I think their roles will kind of morph as we get through the 10 neighborhoods into a combo of outreach and more specific tasks.
Mm-hmm. And sort of from a citizen's point of view, it'll look like, well, we went and we had a conversation with the city and we gave some suggestions, and there's feedback and there's things going to happen.
Absolutely.
And I guess that's what I'm looking for, is a way to connect people with, I made a request of the city and now it's going to happen.
Right, exactly, and that's
Okay.
what we're trying to demonstrate, and I think all of you have articulated that very well. I mean, that's what we heard they wanted, and that's why we like kind of the continuity of, I told this guy this is what or this team, this is what I want. They came back and gave me options, and now they're actually implementing that. So
Okay.
we like that. That messaging is important.
Sure. All right, great.
And that's also part of our communication strategy, because it's one thing to do it, but it's another thing if no one knows that you went ahead and did it, for some of these maybe more subtle processes. And so What's Up Wheat Ridge is a great tool and resource, so we're able to reach back out to individuals who participated, took the survey, came to events, and say, hey, we told you that we were going to request these funds in the 2022 budget, and look at that, they're in the 2022 budget, and when, construction starts on such and such, then you'll be the first to know. So it's, constantly checking back in and letting people know that their feedback is valued and that things are happening.
Terrific. Thank you. Great work. Additional discussion? You're mostly a report tonight, right?
Yep.
No.
Ms. Hutchinson had
Oh, I'm sorry, Ms.
Thank you.
Hutchinson.
What if somebody doesn't have a computer?
Absolutely. So we have, you can take the surveys over the phone, and we can, kind of walk people through the surveys, which we send out the postcards. So you have something physical that has email addresses, though, if you don't have a computer, but we have the phone number for the program as well. People can stop by City Hall and pick up the surveys to take a hard copy, take it home and fill it out and bring it back. And then our community meetings, now that we are able to meet in person, we are able to engage with people in real time. They can take surveys, right there, and we also have fun interactive boards that people can kind of give their feedback in a number of different ways. So if you don't have that technology, there's still a lot of ways to participate.
Mrs. Hulteen?
Thank you. I thought of another question. How are you guys communicating and offering interpretation?
So on the postcard that we send out, we do have a small couple sentences that are in Spanish that talk about if you speak Spanish and you would like to participate, please contact us, and we will provide an interpreter and provide translated. Our What's Up Wheat Ridge also uses the Google Translate function that right in real time you can click and change to hundreds of different languages. And it's something that we've continued to talk about and discuss, and are trying to find best practices within other communities, if doing that is enough, if we need to have, we're also looking at the app that I believe the Wheat Ridge Police Department uses, where you can get a live interpreter on your phone at a moment's notice. And so we don't have we don't have access to that app yet, but we are looking to have that in our future events.
Maybe as you guys are going into new neighborhoods, and if there's demographic, if the demographics are such that it would behoove you maybe to augment the prominence of the Spanish language. I mean, oftentimes if it's a small little bit on the postcard, it doesn't feel as inviting. So I think with some of the neighborhoods that are coming up, it might be worth considering just making that a little bit more enhanced and visible, and maybe even on signs, including some of the language in Spanish, because that it makes a huge difference.
Yeah, this did come up. We went to the Race and Equity Task Force a while back, and this very topic came up, and I think they actually steered us toward the suggestion of getting the app, for example, and so they were really helpful. One other thing we've tried to do and need to do a better job of is sort of the conduits in the community, right? The direct outreach to folks that are trusted within the community, so churches and whatever advocacy groups. We have reached out to them, and the school resource liaisons and things like that. So we have reached out to those folks, without much success, frankly. So, I mean, we have work to do on that front. We totally acknowledge that could be better, but always open to ideas. But that is one other strategy we've tried, is sort of the conduit approach, which, I think the idea being, like you get a postcard and it has a little blurb there. It's like, doesn't feel welcoming and trustworthy, and you're going to be culturally sensitive on all those things. So, but we'll keep trying, and we're always open to ideas on that front.
Thank you. Additional discussion? Okay, well, thank you very much for a great report. It's great work that you're doing, and look forward to more progress reports as it comes down the line. Thank you. Okay, that concludes item number 3. If the let's talk, we are now at item number 4, which is always a highlight of the meeting, our elected officials' reports. Ms. Hoppy.
Thanks, Mr. Mayor. It's not necessarily a report, it's just a question that, Ken, if I put you on the spot for this and you don't know the answer, just say I don't know. So during our budget study session, and then also different conversations about like when the Lutheran Legacy Campus is coming up, that plan's coming up for approval, and then some citizen comments after our budget study session. One of the things that came up was potential civic uses, and we've had conversations a couple of times about how there really is a need for a city hall. So here's my question. Do we have an actual facilities survey or something like that that could tell us what our needs are and how we're meeting those needs currently? Is that something that we would maybe need to look at doing? Like, is that?
Yeah, we do and we don't. It's a great question, and it's one we're thinking about. And when we heard, the council, some level of support for that at the study session for the budget, I think the collective thought from EMT was we need just what you're talking about, right? Which is just kind of a comprehensive facilities master plan. We have bits and pieces of it, right? Because we have a bike ped master plan, we have Right when I started, which is a few years ago now, we had done a city hall assessment, so we can certainly dust that off. We've changed a lot in those 14 years, but that's a reference. The Parks Master Plan certainly outlines some of those capital needs. So we've got some bits and pieces, but I think if you want to add culture to the mix or, get more explicit and be realistic about how you might, bite off those different components, I think, and we have a 5 and 10 year CIP as well that includes some of those aspects as well.
So I guess, because I guess my concern is that if we're looking at our buildings individually, but what we really should be doing is probably assessing our buildings as a whole, because maybe there could be some repurposed space in some places, and then maybe it's, it can really tell the story. Either A, no, you don't necessarily need new facilities, or B, yeah, your facilities are in terrible shape. But would that be something that we would need money? Cause I'm just wondering, because budget's coming up next Monday. So would that be something that we need money for? Would that be something that goes through staff? What do you think?
Well,
And again, if you don't know.
Yeah, I think in my mind, we haven't scoped it out, but we've talked about it, and I do think we'd need some sort of consultant to pull that all together. I mean, obviously, it would be very staff intensive as well, because we know a lot of what, the needs are as well. It's not just going to a book and saying, well, you need that, you need this, we're a unique community like every community and have unique needs. So I think it would need a lot of staff involvement, but it would probably be a consultant that would do that actual document and herding of the various players.
Okay, awesome. Thank you.
Okay. Ms. Hutchinson?
Okay, thank you. This isn't a report, but today I got a voicemail that there was a missing elderly lady. I'm wondering, did anybody hear if she got found?
I didn't see that.
Am I the
report.
only one who got the message? Oh, did you? Yeah. 72 years old, said what she had on, that she had been in a green Subaru, and they had located the Subaru, but not her. That was from the police.
And do you know what part of town this was in?
They didn't say.
Okay, all right. I have not heard anything. Thank you. Ms. Weaver?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I just had a couple quick things. Mr. Johnstone, could you remind us of what and where people should call if they're having issues with an Airbnb that is next to them, and questions about licensing or big parties or things like that? As I've been walking around District 3, I've just had a couple people ask me about specifically what the process is of sort of checking in on.
Right. So I'd be remiss in answering and giving you the wrong answer, because
Sure.
I'm not really in the weeds on the licensing side of things.
Okay.
And so I know there is a complaint line. I know certain things should be, directed actually to a 911 call potentially, right, depending on the scope of what the complaint is. But we have that spelled out. I just can't speak to it directly.
Okay, I'll follow up with you. And,
Okay.
but maybe that's something we could get out publicly
Yep.
at some point. And then I also just wanted to thank you, the group that in Public Works that has been working with the various neighborhoods on speed bumps and things like that. That I've just gotten a lot of great feedback from neighborhoods that have talked to each other and working with speed reduction, and just that they've gotten a lot of really good information from Public Works and your group around these things. So thank
Super.
you.
Thanks.
Ms. Hoppe?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Councilwoman Weaver, I do know that I've asked that question, and some of the information I got is that there's information posted on the FAQ section in the website on the guide to neighbors. What can I do if I have a complaint? So on the city website, there's that. And then for any issues related to general property maintenance or nuisance that's not specifically related to STR, such as noise, weed, trash, illegal parking, contact the Wheat Ridge Police Department Code Enforcement, which is 303-235-2926. And again, for emergencies, please call 911.
Thank you. Ms. Soltine?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I have a couple of things here. First, I just want to thank everyone who came out to my District 2 meeting on Saturday. I had a great turnout, and wanted to thank Kate Benning, who's our communication consultant on the Wadsworth project. She was very helpful answering questions. I had both business owners and residents just really curious about how to communicate with the city once the Wadsworth project starts. So thank you to Kate and to everyone who came and hung out on the most beautiful Saturday morning in Happiness Gardens. And we decided that's where all warm weather meetings should take place in the city. It was really nice. And on that note, Regenerate Wheat Ridge has its final community program this Wednesday from 8 to 9:30 at the lovely Happiness Gardens. And the topic this time around is planning for beneficial bugs. And these are free programs, and they always have a hands-on activity. And so we really encourage people to come and enjoy the final Regenerate Wheat Ridge program. And then lastly, I just want to thank Parks and Rec. I was riding my bike to the rec center yesterday and noticed that the trail underpass, the Kipling underpass trail was completely flooded. And so I quick reached out to the city, and they very quickly put up some trail closure signs. And then this morning I got a picture of the beaver dam in Lena Gulch that had caused the flooding, and I decided it's the most adorable, problematic reason for the trail to flood. But you know, we have beavers and waterways in our city, and I just appreciate Parks and Rec was really responsive to that, because I was a little frustrated getting down that hill and then having to go back up again, and Parks and Rec was on it. So, you know, beavers, they keep us busy, so thanks.
Maybe that was one of the most Wheat Ridge things happening that day. It's the beavers. Okay, any more elected officials matters? I've checked with our deputy clerk. He doesn't have anything. I noticed that our treasurer is with us tonight. Thank you for joining us. And unless you rise and come to the podium, we will not. We'll believe that you don't have any reports for us. But thank you for being here. Any more business to come before our study session? Seeing none, we'll adjourn, and we'll see everybody next week at 7 o'clock right here for our regular council meeting. Thank you.